Alright guys, I'm gonna make a really short video for you guys to review your math today. We're just gonna do some adding and subtracting fractions. And I honestly think this should be pretty easy for most of you guys, and hopefully everybody gets a good grade tomorrow. So the first thing we're gonna start with is adding, and it's 2 and 3/10 plus 5 and 2/5. And the first thing we always need to do is we need to find a common denominator. Now there's a few questions on your quiz tomorrow that ask you to find that common denominator. And some of them don't even ask you to solve the problem, just find a common denominator. So remember, there's a couple ways we can do this. Sometimes we can look at the numbers and realize, well, 2 and 4 share 4. Okay? So let's look at the first one and see what we could do. I think I'm going to do it 3 different ways so you can see it. So for a common denominator for 10 and 5, the first thing I can realize is if I look at 10 and 5, the least common denominator would be 10 because 5 goes into 10 and 10 goes into itself. But let's say I didn't know it was 10. How else could I find a common denominator? I could do it 2 more ways. One way I could do is I could just take the 2 denominators and multiply them together, which is 5 times 10 equals 50. And this is kind of, I call this the last resort method in case we can't figure it out or we just get lost or we just have, one of those moments where our brain's just empty. This is a really easy strategy to remember for those moments. 5 times 10 is 50. Now, I wouldn't want to use 50 because that's going to give me some really big numbers, but that's okay if that's all I have. Another method I can do is I can just list them and I can just go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and then I could go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Okay? And then all I do is I start looking for what numbers do they have in common. They actually have a couple in common. They have 10, they have 20. If I kept going, they would have 30. And then I always want to choose that least common denominator. So I'm going to go with 10. So this is what I'm going to choose, and that's why I did that. So those are 3 ways you can find the common denominator. Always first ask, does the smaller number go into that larger denominator? Does 5 go into 10? And that's a yes. So next thing we have to do after we do that is we have to figure out that equivalent fraction. So 3/10 equals how many tenths? Well, that's really simple. 3/10 equals 3/10. And then 2/5 equals how many tenths? Well, I know that 5 times 2 is 10, so I multiply my numerator by that same multiplication. 2 times 2 is 4. So if I add this together, I'm going to have 3 plus 4 is 7 tenths, and 5 plus 2 is 7. All right, guys, remember, that's how easy this is. Just remember, some of your questions will only focus on finding that denominator. Make sure whenever you do that, though, you write that equivalent fraction. Make sure you follow through all your steps. All right, so let's move on to a subtracting decimal question. And then this will be the same thing as the other one. When we subtract decimals, the first thing we got to do, Coach is walking through making all types of noise right now. When we subtract decimals, what's our first step, Coach? We have to have a common what? Common denominator. All right, same thing as before, guys. The first thing I want to check is I have 6 and 9. Will 6 fit into 9? That's a no. So my next step is I just write out here on the side 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36. And then out here I go 9, 12, 18, 27, 36. Now let's look if they share any common denominators. 6 and 9, no. 12 and 12. Man, I did this wrong. It's not 12. 9 does not go into 12. I'm blame Coach. 9 and 6, no. 9 and 12, no. 18 and 18, that's a match. So my common denominator between 6 and 9 is 18. Okay? Remember, 4 and 5, 6. Now I got to turn that into 18s. So 6 becomes how many 18s? 5, 6, well, 6 goes in 18 3 times. So that's going to be 5 times 3 is 15. 1 and 4/9. We got to convert that 4/9 over to 18 to the denominator 18. So 9 goes in 18 twice, and that's 4 times 2 is 8. And just if you're not clear, you can use this chart to figure out how many times you got to multiply the number by. Look, 6 goes 1, 2, 3. 6 times 3. 9, 1, 2. 9 times 2. Then I subtract that. That's going to give me 7 out of 18. And then I subtract that. And my final answer is 3 and 7/18. And I can't simplify that because 7 is a prime number. One other thing I want to point out to you, if I change this problem up a little bit and I say, let's say instead of subtracting 9, let me get a color so it stands out. Instead of subtracting 4/9, let's say I'm subtracting 8/9. And now I need to rewrite that equivalent fraction. So instead of 8/18, that right there would be 16/18. Okay? And now when I go to subtract, I realize, well, I can't take 16 away from 15. What do I have to do? Well, you have to borrow from that mixed number. And remember, this is 4 wholes. So whatever my denominator, that means that this is 4 wholes, and each one whole equals 18 over 18. So I'm going to cross out, regroup, and borrow from my mixed number, so that becomes 3. And then I need to add the 18 I need to add my denominator to my numerator because I borrowed one whole, or 18 pieces of like an 18-piece pie. That means you have a whole pie still. So I add it to what I already have, and now together, 15 plus 18 is not 23, but 33 over 18. And then I can subtract that from 16, which that would be 17 over 18. And then I just come back and subtract 3 from 1, 3 minus 1, and that would be 2. Remember that regrouping process. If you have to do that, make sure you follow through all the steps and track it and take your time. All right, the last thing you guys will see on your quiz tomorrow is you're going to see some models of some fractions. So let me draw. I'm going to use the same model I drew in class today. So I have one little box all filled up, and then I'll draw another little box. I'm going to cut this box into shade this box in, shade this box in. All right, and then let's slice this box up. All right, so let's do this. What expression is represented from this model? Well, the first thing, let's start with this problem. Well, I have one hole, and then I have 3 areas shaded. So one hole, I have 3 areas shaded, and then out of how many total areas? 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 1 3/4 plus, right here I have 2 holes, and I have 1 area shaded, and then I need to find out how many parts I had for a hole. 1, 2, 3, so 1/3. And that would be my answer. It might ask you to solve it, it might not, but make sure you pay attention to that model. Count the shaded areas. That will be your fraction. The overall shaded areas plus the unshaded areas is your denominator. All right, guys, best of luck. I will see you in the morning, and I'm sure you will do well on this quiz.